Hello coders, welcome back to another video. In this video, we are going to be covering multiple important topics in Java. So some people could say these are foundational topics to object-oriented programming, which is Java. Java is an object-oriented programming language, which basically means we're allowed to create multiple objects from different classes in Java. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to interact with multiple classes, as well as some other topics that are very useful going through your Java programming experience. So let's go ahead and get right in. So for this example, I'm going to be using three classes. Okay, so the last tutorial we covered classes and objects. This time I am going to be basically covering how to use multiple classes and how to interact with them in different forms. So in this example, we have the class house, we have the class building right here, and we have the class construction. Now, as you can read this column right here, this class construction is going to run building and house actually. So in this case, if you realize that these classes do not contain a main method, that is because only one of the classes is going to contain a main method, and that is going to be our construction class. For the rest of them, they're not going to contain a main method because we will be only executing the main method from the construction class. So we will be calling objects of house and building in this construction class and not actually within the class. So in some cases, you do not have to have a main method in every single class you create. You can just have one class that has the main method and then call objects of different classes within that main method in that one specific class. But I'll show you that through the example. So let's go ahead and go back to our house class. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is just creating what you call encapsulation. So encapsulation, what is encapsulation? Encapsulation allows you to pretty much wrap up your data, or in other terms, hide your data from outside classes. So there's not always the requirement of creating public classes, public methods, or public variables. You can create your methods and variables to be private. And if it's private, that means it can only be accessed within that class. So right now we're in the house class. So we'll go ahead and make some private variables. So private. So how do you create private variables? You literally just say private before the variable. So not much changes other than the fact that you're specifying that it's private. So you would say private. And then we could say, in this case, since we're creating a house, right, we could say string address, because maybe we don't want our address visible to all the other classes. We could say private string owner. All right. And we'll go ahead and have those two as private variables. So as you see here, right now we just have two private variables. Now, when you use private variables in a class, that does not mean that you're not allowed to use public variables in the class, which we can do. So I'll go ahead and create some public ones. And we'll go ahead and say one is going to be int age. And the public ones, you don't really have to specify that it's public. As long as you just leave off private, it will automatically assume by default it's public. So that's why I'm not putting public in front of it. As you see here, technically you can. it's not that you have to put it there, but you can leave it off or put it on if you want to. So that's going to be that one, and I'm going to change this to rooms. We could put age, so we could put age of the house because, you know, houses have ages too. And we'll just leave it there for right now. Or actually, let's put baths or bathrooms to not get confused. All right, so now we just have a basic class with variables in it. We don't have anything really going on with the class so far other than creating these variables. So as you see here, right now we don't really have any methods to tell it what to do with these variables. It's not that you necessarily have to have a method to interact with the variables, but in this case, we do want to interact in some way of setting these values and interacting with them within our program. So the first thing we could do is create a method. So we could create public, and I'm just going to create a void method. So we're not returning anything, and I'll say public void. We'll call it house info. All right. So this is pretty much just going to allow us to print the house info and or set the house info. So in this case, you could use a scanner to get this information. So we'll go ahead and implement a scanner for this tutorial. So import util, and asterisk to just get everything. Then I will go ahead and create a scanner in here. Scanner, and we'll go ahead and do new scanner. All right, so now we have our scanner, so we can use that. So I'm going to go ahead and just write out our print statement so I don't have to keep doing it, and I'll copy that. All right, and then I'm going to say here, we could say enter your house information. All right, then we could say how many rooms do you have? Then the next thing would be our input. So we're going to do rooms equals scan dot next int. All right, and then we'll do another print statement that's going to ask for the bathrooms. All right, and then we can do the scanner again. So bathrooms equals scan dot next int. And then finally, we'll just do a simple print statement that's just going to print out the information together. So we could say your house has rooms and bathrooms. All right, so we now have a method within our class that we can use. And this can be easily used to just pretty much call the information that we're creating from these variables, right? So that's something that we can work with. So right now we just have our house, and we're going to actually create our objects of house outside of the class. So we're not actually going to create them inside of the class. We're going to create them in the main method over here. So let's go ahead and do that. We will be creating our main method here. So come in here, do public, static, void, main, string, and arguments. All right, now we have our main method and using house class. So now we're going to be using our house class, and as you know, to create an object, we would say house, and we're going to say h1, or actually let's just write out house1. House1 equals new house. And that's going to create our house object. So now we can start using it. So if you remember, going back over here, we do have this method called house info that we can use. So we can go ahead and do that. So we're going to say house1 dot, and we're going to be using the house info. And then that will allow us to work with it. So let's go ahead and run. And when we're going to run it, it's basically going to find our house class. Now, when it finds our house class, that is because our house class is public. So keep that in mind. It's a little different when you set it to private. So generally, that's why most coders just leave things on public so they can easily interact with them. So everything's working out well. If you see here from our construction class, it called our method we created in our house class. So if you look here, we have no information that's telling us to enter your house information or how many rooms you have. All of that is happening in our house class over here. So when we come back to our construction class, because we're creating an object of the house class, we're allowed to call the methods on the object of the house class. So this is how object-oriented programming is set up. You can use different objects of different classes within multiple classes. So that is why it's kind of helpful. So we'll go ahead and continue to answer this. So we can say we have 3 rooms, and how many bathrooms do you have? We'll say we have 2. And then there you have it. It says your house has 3 rooms and 2 bathrooms. Okay, so that is simply how you can create objects of one class from another class. Now, another thing we could do is try to print out, our access house variables. So let's say we wanted to access the variables that we created in house. So we could do house1 dot, and we'll do here rooms. Okay, so now if we print that out, we'll go ahead and run it. How many rooms do you have? We'll put 10 so it's easy for us to see. And then we'll put 2. And then you see here, it's printing that value of 10 from the line 10 up here, because we just simply said we wanted to print the number of rooms in the house. Now, let's take a trip back to house. Remember when we first started this, we created these private variables, remember? So the private variables are private. They're not going to be seen by this construction class. And what do I mean by that? So if I were to try to print out that address, so we can do house1 dot address or dot, And you see here in this list, there's only those 3 variables that were public: the age, the bathrooms, and the rooms. If I were to do address, then you see we're getting an error right here. So because we're getting an error, it's because we have it set to private. So that's why this class construction cannot see whatever that private variable is in house, because it only exists within house. It's hidden. So this, in a sense, is encapsulation. Encapsulation allows you to hide certain things from one class to another class. So basically, address and user only exist to the house class. They are not visible by any other class within our IDE or in our program. So for us to use them, if you see here in this error, it says create a getter or setter for address, right? So a getter or a setter is basically used to allow you to access that information. So if I were to just click this, and I'm going to click it, it says getter and setter. And with Eclipse, that's why I like it, is because it'll just do it for you in case you need it. Other times you'll have to create it. So if you wanted to create it, then you could use built-in functionality. Generally, most IDEs have them, but that's why I like using Eclipse. But for this, I'm not going to use this. It will automatically create it for me, but for this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do it yourself first. So we'll go over to the house class. Okay, so now we're going to have to create getters and setters. So getters and setters are basically methods that will allow you to get and or set values. These are generally used with those private variables. So we're going to create our getter method. Now, when we create our getter method, we're going to create this as public because we want it to be seen by other classes. So public. And when it's called a getter, you're literally going to say get. That's the first thing you're going to say, get. But what are you getting? In this case, we want to get address. So we're going to get address. And we'll set it up like that. Well, I'm also going to return in this, so we don't have to worry about doing void, because we're going to want to return what our address is. So return address to user. In this case, all you would have to say is return address. Oh, put a capital A. Return address. Okay. And when I'm doing that, we also want to tell it what we're returning. So we don't have our data type. So if you hover here, it says return type for the method is missing. So it tells me I can set it as a string, which is what I'm going to do. So you could also set it as void, but generally you know what type of data you're returning. So just put that here in the middle. So now we have our getter. Now the only problem is that we don't have, or we're not setting our address. So we could set our address as well. So I'm going to create another method up here above our getter that's just going to collect our private information. So we could say public void private house info. We'll call it that. And I'm going to create that. So our private house info is going to ask the user to enter in the house information. In this case, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and put some print statements. We're going to say, what is your address? Because we need to set our variable that is at the top. So we would say address, it's going to equal scan.next line and end that off. And then we're going to ask, who is the owner, because those are our two private variable. Who is the owner? And we'll put that here. And then we'll do owner equals scan dot next. We'll do line again. Oops. Put it down here. All right. So now we have a method here that would allow us to access that information, or enter that information, I should say. So being that that's public, let's test out how this would work from the construction class. So here we already have house as an object, so we can test the private house info method. Now remember, our variables we're setting in our private house info method are actually private already. So remember, when I tried to access it here, it was giving us errors. So I'm going to go ahead and take that one out. We're going to do house one dot. Then we're going to do private house info. All right, we'll go ahead and click run. And how many rooms do you have? We're going to put 10. How many bathrooms do you have? We're going to put 3. Remember, this 10 is coming from here. So I could have taken that out, but just for the example, I'll leave it in. So you see here, it says what is the address and who is the owner. There wasn't any point where it stopped to allow us to input it. So if I were to type in this, right, and then who is the owner, it's not letting me type anything because they're private. So it let us run it, but it didn't let us set the values because we're not allowed to interact with them from this area. So in this case, we'll go ahead over here, and then we would have to pretty much use the getters and setters in this case. So here we have our getter, right? We have our getter here, but we're going to have to use our setter as well. So we'll have to create a setter. So as you can think, the setter is going to allow us to literally set our method or set our variable. So here we're going to create a setter. So we're going to do public void because we're not returning anything, and we're going to do set address. Okay, so you see how it's matching? The method is matching the name of the variable that we are setting and getting. So you need to mention the variable that's being that's going to be get and what's going to be setting. So here we have that information. We're going to, for this case, pass in a value because it needs to know what to set the value to. So in this case, we're going to do string A, and A is going to represent what our address is going to be. So another thing you could do is address. You could simply say address because we do have it as the variable, and then there is the this keyword. So when you use the this keyword, this is saying this class. So when you say this, it's saying get whatever this class is dot this variable. So we're in the house method. So when we do this, we can do this dot address equals address. Okay, so as you see here, this is brown and this is brown. It's basically saying that it's going to set this dot address, and when it says this, it means house dot address. This is just referring to the actual class you're in, which is house. So alternatively, this is saying house dot address is going to equal address, and the address that is equaling is this address, not the one in the house. So it can be a little confusing, but just keep that in mind. So this is going to allow us to set the address for our user. right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this and then use it in our other class. So over here, we're just going to go ahead and take these two. Or actually, we don't even have to. I'm not even going to deal with the scanner and the construction. We'll go ahead and comment this out for now. We'll go use it after. So all right, so first up, we know that our object is house 1, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use house 1 dot. Now when we do dot, you see there is get address. In this case, we want to do set address first. So set address, and we're going to put in here what our address is going to be. So 123 Happy Street, right? So that's going to set our address. Then let's say we want to get that address. So right now we're just going to set it. If you set it, you can't necessarily access it yet. You're just setting the value. So we're actually just setting whatever that private address is from our house right now from our construction. Now we need to get the value of address. And by doing that, we're going to do house 1 dot get address. And if you do that, that will get our address. So let's go ahead and run and see what it looks like now. So here we have how many rooms do you have? We'll say 10. How many bathrooms? We're going to say 3. And then here you have that information. Now, as you see, we have no errors. There's no errors going on here. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, well, I don't see this get address. The reason you don't see the get address is because you never told the program to print it to you. So for you to see it, you have to literally tell your program to, hey, print this out for me. So I'm going to go ahead and add my print statement, and I'm just going to change this. Let me delete this from the last thing I copied. We're going to let me recopy this for future use. All right, so now we want to say that we want to print this out. So I'm going to just delete this, and I'm going to highlight this and move it upwards into here and delete that. All right, and then now we are now having that get value in our print statement. So 10, we'll put 3. All right, and boom. Now you see 123 Happy Street. Now remember, address was private, but because we used the getter and setter and we set it here, we set it inside of this construction class, and we're accessing it from this construction class, we use the getter and setter to basically get and set that value. So if I were to copy this again and paste it, and then here I'm gonna say 123 Sad Street just to switch it up. Then we'll run it again. Then you'll see that it's going to give us whatever our new value is. So 12, and I'll just put 3. And then here you see it's giving us 123 Happy Street, 123 Sad Street. So that is basically how you can work with encapsulated values. Yes, they are private, and technically they only exist in the house class. They're not seen from the construction class, but if we use getters and setters to access those values, then it will allow us to work with those variables. So for this, although I did print out this information, right, I can go in and also add a print statement in front of it. And so we can say the address is And then that will just give it some words in front of it. So it's not just printing out whatever, random is there. So we'll do another one, test. All right, and then you see the address is 123 Sad Street. And that is the example of encapsulation. So, yes, encapsulation is both useful and very helpful in certain cases that you don't necessarily want to access certain things from. So, that is, something to keep in mind. But do you have to use private variables? No. You can use just public variables. In some cases, there may be the time where you want to use private variables, but do you have to? No. But I thought it would still be helpful for you to at least see how to work with private variables and working with encapsulation. So it's just pretty much only existing in house until we created a method, which was our getters and setters, to access it from the other class. So that is why when this topic is very important, there are cases where you will need to use getters and setters. So this was introducing your private variables, your private getters and setters, and how to also use them within another class. So I'm going to go ahead and stop right here on this lesson. In the next video, we will continue with these same classes, but I don't want to put too much all in one video, so I'm going to stop right here on this one. And if you are taking a break, please spend the time to practice this concept. As I like to say, the more that you practice, the better you get, and the better you get, the more confident you'll feel on your programming journey. And please stay tuned for the next video as we will get deeper into classes and objects. So I'll see you soon.